I'm Bill Hosley and a big fan of Weekend in Norfolk, an event that showcases the cultural treasures, creativity, and history of a town filled with it. Norfolk Center Cemetery is a perfect place to discover some town history and see some fascinating monuments and gravestones. There's no end to what you can learn about a place from the backstories of people buried in a place like this. I got some help by meeting up with town historian Richard Byrne and his assistants Rose and Jess. Norfolk was one of the last towns settled in the original division of Connecticut. It was rough country here before the American Revolution. There were plenty from the first generation buried here. Eunice North from 1777 and Mrs. Thanks Phelps from 1778 are among them, as are Joseph Holt, who died in 1779, and Moses Case in 1781. These two are decorated with abstract winged effigies by unidentified early stonecutters working local stone. Dazia Pettibone, 1774, and Giles Pettibone, 1810, were both made of marble from the region. Giles' stone from 1811 notes it was erected from sentiments of pious regard by his surviving widow. His first wife, shown here, died in 1774 at age 34. Thomas Hamilton from 1771 and William Walter, 1796, both are of Litchfield County marble, though you'd never know it for the lichen and discoloring. These would look great if gently cleaned. While every stone represents a story that can be researched, some hint at their story right out. Thomas Curtis died at Stillwater in August 1776. What's Stillwater? It's the name of the town where the Battle of Saratoga took place a year later, one of the 2 or 3 most important engagements of the American Revolution. The 1879 monument on the left is part of the historic commemoration there. When I stumbled on this 1783 stone marking the grave of Highland Hall, I recognized the name as a former governor of Vermont, probably this man's great-grandson. Interestingly, the stone describes him as living in Cornwall, Vermont. Half the people in that part of Vermont migrated from this part of Litchfield County. Poor Martha Allen. She was 2 years and 10 months old when she died in 1784, 42 days after a bite from a mad cat. How do we know? It says so. Mad cat? Did they have pets on the frontier in the 18th century? This big table stone marks the graves of Reverend Ammi and Elizabeth LeBaron Robbins, who died in 1813 and 1829, respectively. Robbins, the son of a minister in Brantford, studied under Reverend Joseph Bellamy in nearby Bethlehem, graduated from Yale in 1760, and at the age of 21 was ordained as pastor of Norfolk's First Church. He served as a chaplain in the Rev War. This amazing portrait of him is at Yale Art Gallery. Status and education don't spare grief. 4 of the Robbins children died between 1763 and 1767. Anna, the wife of Colonel Jeremiah Phelps, died in 1839. Samuel and Thankful Gaylord in 1776 and 1796, among the founders of the town. A little later, we find Pitt Bliss from 1810 and Elizabeth Stevens, 1837, both in native marble, though again, Bliss could use a cleaning. The Civil War touched every town in Connecticut. Here lies Adjutant Samuel Barnum, who died in Washington, D.C. from wounds at Cold Harbor, considered one of the worst northern defeats of the war. An adjutant is an administrative assistant to a senior officer. The stone also notes he settled Norfolk from Brookfield and identifies its maker as C. Jackson of Waterbury. Black, white, Protestant, Catholic, everyone is together here in Center Cemetery. Industrialization attracted a substantial Irish community as early as the 1840s. William Ryan, Alan Sullivan, Matthew and Anne Ryan are here. Norfolk Historical staged a fascinating exhibition about Norfolk's Irish a few years ago. No rural town has the depth and richness of Norfolk's African-American history. How's Jupiter Mars for a name? He and his wife Fanny and children were enslaved in nearby Canaan to an owner who was moving to Virginia. They knew and escaped to Norfolk, where they were housed and protected by a local family as early as the 1790s. Their son James Mars prompted late in life by the claim that Connecticut didn't have slavery, wrote Life of James Mars, a slave born and sold in Connecticut, one of the most important accounts of the enslaved in New England. Mars married, and the family moved to Hartford, where he became a deacon in the Talcott Street Congregational Church. Norfolk Historical's exhibition on Norfolk's Black history was path-breaking, state-of-the-art research, based in part on evidence found in Center Cemetery. Bilha Freedom, the wife of Peter Freedom, is described on her stone of 1871 as of African and princely descent, of queenly yet deferential demeanor, greatly respected and beloved. For lives rarely written, this is an amazing document. In 1900, Theron Crissey devoted a chapter of his Norfolk history to Norfolk's African Americans. Norfolk's Anti-Slavery Society was founded in 1841, and the town had safe houses on the Underground Railroad. These free blacks owned log cabin houses, attended local schools, and during the Civil War enlisted in the military. Here we see Peter Freedom, his wife Chlorine, and their daughter Chlorine, who lived through the Civil War and Emancipation. Both parents were born before the American Revolution. Charles Van Alstyne, who served in the Mass 54th Regiment of Colored Troops, survived the war and lived until 1899. Harvey and Sarah Tibbles were involved in the anti-slavery movement and may have used their house on the Underground Railroad. John Funk was in Company B of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery that saw action at Cold Harbor, Petersburg, Winchester, and Fort Fisher. What stories they could tell, what stories we could tell, if teachers brought their students here. The Victorians celebrated the nuclear family with large obelisks from left to right: Philip and Sarah Curtis, Abel and Carolyn Camp, Captain John and Mary Dewell. Captain Dewell manufactured scythes and served in Connecticut's General Assembly. Their son James was elected lieutenant governor in 1897. An alert eye will find artistic flourishes on some of the gravestones. I love this one of little May Swain. A dog here, a bird there, lots to see. Gilded Age monuments become rather extravagant. This one for John and Margaret Mills Shepherd was made by James Batterson's New England Granite Company about 1880. Batterson was the founder of Travelers Insurance Company and also one of the leading monument makers in the U.S. He got his start nearby in the marble quarries in New Preston. Then there are the Battels. Joseph settled at Norfolk about 1792 and married Sarah Robbins, the daughter of the town's first minister. He built a dairy empire. Their children had a huge philanthropic impact on Norfolk, Yale, and Middlebury College. Son Robbins was a giant in Connecticut political, social, and philanthropic circles. He was president of the Connecticut Historical Society, where his uncle Thomas Robbins was the founding librarian. His brother Joseph Battelle II was a New York merchant described on his stone as a reverent believer in Christ. His sister Ellen Battelle married into the Eldridge family. It was not uncommon for Victorian-age families to have large burial compounds. This is the Eldridge family plot. Reverend Joseph Eldridge was the next Norfolk minister with Robbins Battelle family ties. He married Sarah Battelle after his first wife died. Their daughters Isabel and Mary Eldridge lived into the 20th century. Isabel helped fund the town's architecturally distinguished library. The Irish cross form of marker is ornate arts and crafts style. Robbins Battelle's daughter Ellen married Carl Steckel, whose father Gustav was a pioneering figure in Yale's music school. They built the famous music shed, home of the Yale Norfolk Chamber Music Festival. Little Anna Battelle Eldridge was the daughter of another family clergyman, the Reverend Azariah, and his wife Ellen Battelle Eldridge. Next to her is Cynthia Dewell. Note the religious symbolism. The Welch family occupy another family compound. William Henry Welch was an American physician who famously became the first dean of Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. In his lifetime, he was called the Dean of American Medicine. His father, grandfather, and 4 uncles were physicians. Yale class of 1870, Skull and Bones fraternity, Welch played a major role in the response to the 1918 influenza pandemic. Maria Kendall was the subject of 2 outstanding exhibitions at Norfolk Historical Society. She was an outstanding photographer and entrepreneur who exhibited at the 1893 Chicago's World Fair. Alfredo Taylor was a society architect who designed many of the most inspiring houses and public buildings in Norfolk, including the Royal Atheneum in the center of town. There are so many illustrious people buried in Norfolk, it's hard to cite one more than another. James Laughlin was a poet and literary book publisher. His grandfather built the fourth largest steel company in the country. He befriended Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas in France, and Ezra Pound, who encouraged him to go into publishing. While a student at Harvard, he founded New Directions Publishing, which published authors such as William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, Henry Miller, Wallace Stevens, and E. E. Cummings. Finally, the late Brendan Gill, Yale class of 1936, the New Yorker's architecture critic, and a champion of historic preservation who joined Jacqueline Kennedy's coalition to preserve and restore New York's Grand Central Terminal. At his memorial service in 1898, George Plimpton said, "The only things Brendan hadn't been able to save in his lifetime were Ebbets Field, Alger Hiss, the Reichstag, the Edsel, and the passenger pigeon." Gill was the rare figure, a celebrated writer who was also a lion of New York's civic and social worlds. Welcome to Weekend in Norfolk. It's the best event in Connecticut, a model for how a community can put its past, present, and creative community to the highest, best use. So much, so close ought to be Connecticut's tagline. We're sitting on a gold mine, and so much of it is in small towns and local museums, and yes, our cemeteries and burying grounds. It's one-stop shopping for history, art, and nature, a perfect place to learn about Norfolk.